Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Two of Wands. Now, of course, the aces have no real astrological attributions to them. Everything below the ace, so 2 through 10, all of those pips, of course, have astrological attributions, and those really fine-tune the essence of or the meaning of the card, really. You can of course get a general idea of what the card means by comparing the Sephirah that it exists in with the suit that it is of, but you really don't get a unique identity of the card until you focus on what decan it is associated with. And some of them you will find some additional reasoning behind their meaning if you look up the Shamhamfarash angels that go with each decan. If you take the time to look through that, you'll find some pretty interesting similarities between the angels associated with those decans and the divinatory meanings of the cards. Some of them make a lot of sense, some of them not so much. And of course, Alistair tells us not to really worry about the Shimham Farash when talking about the minor arcana. But it is something that some of you who are overachievers may or may not want to check up on your Shimham Farash. And of course, for those of you who don't know, the Shimham Farash angels are the 72 angels whose names are basically it's their names are derived from a passage of Exodus that supposedly spells out some 72-lettered name of God or whatever. I don't deal too much with that whole branch of magic, nor do I really look into the Shimham Farash very much, but I have looked up the Shimham Farash angels for each minor arcana, and I found it interesting and definitely enlightening. So again, something to consider for those of you who really are into getting into the minors. So anywho, so with the Two of Wands, as we talked about, the number two is of course associated with Hokmah, the father, the archetypal father, um, at least the archetypal father as expressed in the supernal triad. Um, the number two is, of course, associated with wisdom, therefore, and is associated with willpower. If the ace is simply the unmanifested root of potential, the aces are always called the roots of the powers of blank, whatever suit element it is. Um, excuse me. Whereas the twos are more of that potentiality in some kind of I don't want to say extension because philosophically extension is not the right word for it. When we think of potentiality in extension, we think of it as manifested in space or time and or time. Meaning it is made divisible. Its unity is no longer expressed in a single in a sense of singularity. It is expressed in a changing form through multiple spaces over multiple periods of time. That's usually what we mean by in extension. But in this case, in the ideal realm of the supernal triad, before we even get the idea of space or time, neither of those ideas really and truly exist in the way that we think of them scientifically. Okay, they sort of exist as general ideas. They don't even really exist, which is very confusing for us to think about and is kind of pointless to even think about. But that is what we're dealing with. So the two is therefore, in some ways, the raw energy of that potentiality, how that potentiality expresses itself as an energy form. And so the energy of the suit of wands is expressed in the two, and we have Mars in Aries. So we not only get this idea of raw masculine energy being used in a sort of creative fashion, though it does not necessarily have to be in a creative fashion. We're told in the Book of Thoth that it is in a creative fashion, but in my experience, the Two of Wands does not necessarily have to divinatorily represent a creative act. The Two of Wands, in general, can represent just a very bold action, something that is almost unexpected, very just very bold, very courageous, very um, kind of I almost want to say reckless. It doesn't necessarily care whether or not its action is logical. It doesn't really care about the consequences of its action. It simply acts. And that comes a little bit from Aries, I think, being a very stubborn one way or no way kind of sign. But Mars also gives us a tremendous amount of force and aggression and masculine energy. Mars and Aries, not only does Mars really like to be in Aries, I believe Mars is exalted in Aries. Um, or does Mars rule Aries and the Sun is exalted in Aries? I forget. But either way, Mars is very happy in Aries. And so the combination of Mars and Aries, which are both intensely masculine energies, you get this overall idea of hypermasculinity in the Two of Wands. Um, so the two tends to represent boldness. It can also represent, and I think part of this goes along with the boldness. It can also represent destruction. Um, we are told that these wands are actually dorges, is I believe the correct pronunciation. I don't know how else one would pronounce it, but they are references to these Tibetan staffs, I guess, that represent lightning bolts and thunder. And so, um, what Crowley tells us about that is that, of course, lightning and thunder are seen as very destructive things, but in fact, they can also be causes of generation. That generation and creation do not that are really contingent upon destruction, are contingent upon something else being broken up or destroyed. That destruction is an inherent aspect of creation. And I think that that also has to do with this boldness of the Two of Wands. I always see um, the Two of Wands as sort of Godhead's boldness in creating anything at all, because of course to create something out of nothing requires division and requires a lot of pain and a lot of struggle, and it requires allowing difficulty and separation and loneliness. It requires all these horrible things to enter into existence. But you cannot have the beauty and wonderfulness that is existence without those things. You simply cannot make something out of nothing without those things. And so it does take a really kind of ballsy God to allow that to happen, to say to heck with it, I'm going to do it anyway. That's what the Two of Wands is all about. It's saying um, it's throwing caution to the wind. It's not really caring about the consequences. It's simply doing because one feels that that is what they are being called to do for whatever reason. It's simply raw willpower you exercised um, in some kind of fashion. So the twos are also semi-ambiguous because they're not really defined yet. It isn't until the number three that we get a real sense of an idea, if that makes any sense. Okay. So yeah, that's what I would say about the two. And next one we will move on to the Three of Wands.